is CGTN, China Global Television Network.
Live from London, this is The World Today.
Hello, I'm Robin Dwyer. Welcome to the programme. Our top stories. Iran's president vows a decisive response after dozens are killed during week-long protests over a woman's death in police custody. Washington considers fresh sanctions on Moscow as referendums on joining Russia continue in occupied parts of Ukraine. And Italians prepare to go to the polls. Right-wing leader Giorgia Meloni is the favourite to become the next Prime Minister. Protests are spreading across Iran after the death of a woman detained by the country's morality police for wearing what they called unsuitable clothing. Dozens of people have been killed in the week-long demonstrations. The government has vowed to deal with the protests decisively. Our correspondent Naweed Jabakil reports.
Protests on this scale are rare in Iran, yet thousands have taken to the streets in recent days. Public anger sparked by the death of 22-year-old Mahsa Amini in police custody last week, detained for allegedly wearing her headscarf too loosely. These demonstrations across the country are the largest seen in years and have morphed into a symbol of wider political discontent and support for women's rights in the Islamic Republic. The authorities are pushing back. At least 35 people have been killed in the last week, with reports of live rounds being fired by security officials. Government supporters have held their own rallies in major cities like Tehran. Iran's president now calling for more decisive action to quash the protests. In an exclusive interview with CGTN, he blamed Western countries for the disorder.
Riding waves of weakening and destroying a country is no longer tied to that young lady's lost life. This is something that the Americans wish to do, that the Westerners wish to do, to ride this wave of provocation and encourage looting and violence. This will not be tolerated.
The US says Iranians are protesting for their own rights, but they will support them to, quote, confront oppression. It's relaxed sanctions on American tech firms to help Iranian internet users avoid a crackdown. The United Nations has also voiced concern about the situation.
We're obviously concerned about the reports of peaceful protests being met by excessive use of force, leading to dozens of deaths and injuries. We call on security forces to refrain from using unnecessary and disproportionate force and appeal to all to exercise restraint to avoid further escalation.
Mahsa Amini's death has triggered international protests and demands for more freedoms for Iranian women. And its impact is reverberating in a country with a young population facing severe economic challenges and years of isolation on the global stage. Naweed Jabakil, CGTN.
The United States says it's prepared to impose more sanctions on Russia over what it calls sham referendums being held in occupied areas of Ukraine. The vote on whether to join Russia has been condemned by Kyiv, Western leaders and the United Nations. But Moscow says it offers an opportunity for people in the region to express their views. Our correspondent Stuart Smith reports.
In central Moscow, the government has authorized a rally in support of referendums in 4 Russian-held areas of Ukraine. It's called Not Abandoning Our Own, a reference to the belief that the people liberated in these regions are ethnically Russian and should therefore be Russian citizens. Some of those residents eligible to vote are living here in Moscow, and those we spoke to were excited about the prospect of joining Russia.
Since the 1990s, Russians started to be mistreated because you couldn't work in any official institution without Ukrainian, but that region is completely Russian-speaking.
I voted to join Russia because I think it's the only way to defend the children, grandmothers and grandfathers, unprotected civilians on the territory where I lived and where I'm from.
I think it's every citizen's duty to lend his or her voice, especially since we've been waiting so many years for this moment, and it would have been a shame to miss such a day.
It will be better. We were a small republic before, and now we'll become a great country.
One of the organisers of the day's rally says it will help express the support of Muscovites to the residents of what it called the liberated territories. But some are less enthusiastic.
Perhaps it would have been better to hold it after the special military operation, or the war, whatever you call it.
This referendum had to happen. We're a brotherly nation, and if these territories join the Russian Federation, it would be really good.
Moscow-installed officials in these regions say they expect the final outcome to be in their favour, that the regions they now represent will become part of Russia. If they do, one regional official made clear it would then be Ukrainian armed forces who are considered the illegal occupiers, and the Kremlin says Ukrainian attacks on these territories will be regarded as an attack on Russian territory. But that's all been brushed off by Ukraine, which says it'll continue to fight. Stuart Smith, CGTN, Moscow.
Well, Ukraine's President Volodymyr Zelensky says the Russian referendums are crimes against a nation. Let's talk to our correspondent Sergio Olmos in the capital, Kyiv. So, Sergio, reports of intimidation and people not being allowed to leave these occupied areas during the vote.
That's right. As Associated Press is reporting today, these Moscow-orchestrated voting today, pretext for annexation. We're seeing Ukrainian officials come out very strongly describing conditions under which Ukrainians in occupied territory are having to face these votes. We're from the governor of Luhansk, Serhiy Gadai, saying that this looked more like an opinion survey under the barrels of a gun. He described two cities in the Luhansk region, one which people there could not move freely, could not leave their houses until they had voted, another in which employees showed up to their workplace and the manager of the establishment there told them that they could not leave, or they could not keep their job if they did not vote. Voting was a requirement for them to maintain employment there. So clearly we're seeing pretty harsh conditions under which a normal election process, would not be viewed as legitimate. We're also seeing, just on Russian state media itself, not a lot of effort to kind of conceal what is going on there. Russian state media is showing election workers showing up to people's houses with armed guards and having people vote right in front of them, and you could actually see the paper who they're voting for in front of the election official, in front of the armed guards. All that being said, Moscow maintains that this is a way for the Russian-speaking people to have a voice. Many countries have now come out already ahead of the expected announcement on Tuesday, saying they would not accept this referendum as legitimate. This includes the United States. Ukraine, President Volodymyr Zelensky specifically, has been urging Western allies not to accept the outcome of this election. And really, they have been expecting this for some time. There's been talks about annexation for several weeks now.
So if the vote is in favour of joining Russia, what will that mean for the war?
Yeah, for Ukraine on the ground, actually not much would change. We're seeing that Ukraine hasn't changed their battlefield plans so far. I spent the week in Kharkiv, where they're pushing the Russian forces back. They've gained back about 6,000 square kilometers, and they're still pushing. They have not stopped or paused their counteroffensive in Kharkiv. They're continuing on. They're now into the town, near the town of Liman in the Donbass, pushing the Russian forces back, continuing to take territory. In Kherson, they're, again, the battles are continuing in the Kherson region. They're trying to isolate the 20,000 Russian troops there. Even as this referendum is taking place, they do not view it as legitimate. Their plan remains to try to retake as much territory as they can before the winter sets in, to try to not be subjected to a peace deal where Russia has a stronger negotiating position. They are trying to take back as much territory as they can via the battlefield, and they're asking Western allies not for necessarily diplomatic pressure at this point on Russia, but actual sanctions and for weapons. They're asking for tanks to try to regain their territory that way.
Sergio Olmos in Kyiv, thank you very much. China's Foreign Minister Wang Yi is addressing the United Nations General Assembly in New York shortly. His speech comes a day after he met US Secretary of State Antony Blinken on the sidelines of the summit. Recent tensions between the two sides follow a visit to Taiwan by US House Speaker Nancy Pelosi last month and a pledge by President Joe Biden to defend it. Well, our correspondent John Terrett is in New York. So, John, Wang Yi expected to address the UN Assembly any moment now, really. What are we expecting him to say?
Yes, I've got a monitor in front of the camera here, and I can see the representative from the Holy See, which is the Catholic Church, the Vatican, basically, giving their address to the General Assembly at the moment. And we are expecting, if the speakers list is accurate and if they are following it, then we're expecting Wang Yi, the respected State Councillor and Foreign Minister for China, to speak afterwards. But I have some breaking news, first of all, if I may, Robin. We've just heard that the UN Security Council is going to meet on Tuesday to look at the issue of the referenda being carried out in the east of Ukraine. President Biden, when he was here on Wednesday, called those referenda shams, a sham referenda, he said, and they go against the UN Charter, according to the Secretary-General, Antonio Guterres, and many, many others. But that's Tuesday. Today is only Saturday morning here in New York, and let me tell you about Wang Yi. He's the 10th speaker, any minute now then. He met Secretary of State Blinken yesterday, the U.S. Secretary of State, and we have a readout from the Ministry of Foreign Affairs. Bilateral relations between the two sides are facing the greatest challenges. They are at a critical point, according to the Ministry of Foreign Affairs, and as we've been saying all this week, Taiwan is the major sticking point. The Ministry of Foreign Affairs says that the U.S. is sending wrong and dangerous signals over Taiwan, and what they mean by that is comments by President Joe Biden that the U.S. will defend Taiwan at all costs. China says that's just not right, and it certainly isn't right under the agreed one China policy, which both sides have certainly signed up to, of course. Now, the pair promised to keep open lines of communication between them, particularly at times of tension like we're in now. And Antony Blinken, before the meeting finished, said that cooperation between Washington and Beijing was in the interest of both sides. Now, we know that there's diplomacy going on behind the scenes. There always is at all sorts of junior levels. But I think it's fair to say that we are at a low now, one of the lowest points we've ever been, in fact, when it comes to US-China relations. As for the speech that we're about to hear from Wang Yi when he stands up, well, I think he's going to put China's place in the New World Order clearly into perspective. And I think he's also going to talk a lot about multilateral approaches. This is the new theme here, multilateral, working together. You know, the Secretary-General talked about that in his opening speech on Tuesday morning. And we know that Wang is going to mention this because it's been revealed now in the last hour or two that on Friday, among many other people that he's been meeting, he met with the UN Secretary-General Antonio Guterres. And Wang Yi said the world is full of changes and chaos, and he said China deeply shares the Secretary-General's call for strengthening international cooperation. And in the readout from that meeting with Antonio Guterres, Wang Yi goes on to say that the core policy of China on Ukraine is to persuade peace and promote talks and to play a constructive role in our own way. Well, that is a very Chinese thing to say, if you don't mind me saying so. I think that really sums up the entire Chinese policy on lots of different things. They want to play their role in it, but they want to do it very often in their own way. Robin?
Well, John, while we wait for that speech from Wang Yi, other people speaking today include Russia's Foreign Minister Sergei Lavrov.
Yes, now Sergei Lavrov is very well known here. He used to be the Soviet, I think, and then the Russian, when they changed over, diplomat to the United Nations, and then he became the foreign minister well over 20 years ago. He's a very, very experienced diplomat on the global stage, and he is speaker number 15. So if Wang Yi, who is about to speak, is number 10, and if the order is stuck to this Saturday morning, early afternoon, then I guess we're looking like an hour, maybe 90 minutes away, possibly even a bit more, from hearing from the Russian Foreign Minister Sergei Lavrov. But the thing about Sergei Lavrov is that he's going to, in his speech, he will set out the President Putin position on the situation regarding Ukraine and other things in the world. But he's then going to go on and hold a news conference. And the thing about Sergei Lavrov is that he really is very used to handling journalists and answering questions. And he often does it in rather a fiery sort of way. So it could be quite a fiery sort of news conference when we get to it. It's not going to be until much later this afternoon now, though. But we kind of know the sort of thing that he's likely to say because Sergei Lavrov was part of the UN Security Council meeting on Thursday, which was called for by the French to look at the security situation regarding the Ukraine. And he kind of flounced in, gave his speech, and then flounced out again without so much of a bio leave to almost anybody else in the room. But what he did do in the course of that speech was to reject almost every charge leveled against Moscow regarding Ukraine. I mean, almost everything. The invasion, which of course they called a special operation, abuses, the threat of tactical nuclear weapons being used on the battlefield, all those kind of things were pushed back on strongly by Sergei Lavrov. And he said at one point, you know, that the special operation in Ukraine, which started in the early part of 2022, was inevitable and necessary after 8 years of attacks on Russian-speaking people in the Russian-speaking regions of the eastern part of Ukraine. So that is the tone that he's likely to adopt when he speaks. And when we get to the press conference, I'm sure it's whatever he says, it's almost guaranteed, I think, to make headlines. Robin, do you want to ask me another question? Because I'm sure the Holy See is wrapping up now.
Well, John, I was going to say we will pop back to New York to listen in to Wang Yi when he begins to speak. So you listen in where you are, and we will listen in where we are. John Terrett in New York, thank you very much.
Okay. Perfect.
Still ahead here on CGTN. The race to lead Italy. The country is about to head to the polls with a right-wing candidate favourite to be the next Prime Minister.
This week on Razor, the problem with renewable energy is storing it. For that, you need batteries. This week, we look at all manner of battery technologies and how we must be sure we're not replacing one form of pollution with another.
We don't want recycling to restrict and hamper innovation on batteries. But by the same token, we need batteries that are designed for recycling and remanufacture.
Welcome back to CGTN, where we're going to take you straight to New York and listen in to China's Foreign Minister Wang Yi, who is about to deliver his speech to the UN General Assembly. Let's listen in.
Mr. President, dear colleagues, we are at a time fraught with challenges. COVID-19 has kept resurfacing. Global security faces uncertainty. Global economic recovery is fragile and unsteady, and various risks and crises are emerging. The world has entered a new phase of turbulence and transformation. Changes unseen in a century are accelerating. But we are also at a time full of hope. The world continues to move toward multipolarity, economic globalization is deepening, and our societies are becoming increasingly digitalized and culturally diverse. Countries are becoming ever more interconnected and interdependent. Peace and development remain the underlying trend of our times. People's call for progress and cooperation is getting louder. How should we respond to the call of our times and ride the trend of history to build a community with a shared future for mankind? China's answer is firm and clear. First, we must uphold peace and oppose war. President Xi Jinping notes that peace, like air and sunshine, is hardly noticed when we are benefited from it, but none of us can live without it. Peace is crucial for our future, and it underpins common security of all countries. Turbulence and war can only open Pandora's box, and he who instigates a proxy war can easily get himself burned. Pursuing one's own absolute security can only undermine global strategic stability. We must address differences by peaceful means and resolve disputes through dialogue and consultation. Second, we must pursue development and eliminate poverty. Development holds the key to resolving difficult issues and delivering a happy life to our people. We should place development at the center of the international agenda, build international consensus on promoting development, and upholding all countries' legitimate right to development. We should, fostering new drivers for global development, forge a global development partnership, and see that everyone in every country benefits more from the fruits of development in a more equitable way. Third, we must remain open and oppose exclusion. President Xi pointed out that openness is the sure way to human prosperity and advancement. Protectionism can only boomerang, and decoupling and supply chain disruption will hurt everyone. We should stay true to openness and inclusiveness and tear down fences and barriers that hinder the free flow of factors of production. We should uphold the WTO-centered multilateral trading system and work for an open world economy. Fourth, we must seek cooperation and oppose confrontation. As we face a host of global challenges, our biggest strength will come from solidarity. Our best strategy is to stick together, and the only way forward is through win-win cooperation. It is natural that countries might have their differences and problems, but they should increase mutual understanding on the basis of equality and respect. We should engage in dialogue, consultation, and win-win cooperation, and reject conflict, coercion, and zero-sum game. We should jointly oppose group politics and bloc confrontation. Fifth, we must strengthen solidarity and oppose division. President Xi stated that countries around the world are like passengers on the same ship who share a common stake. All of us should pull together to navigate the ship through storm toward a bright future. Our world must embrace diverse civilizations in order to make continuous advances, and mankind must pursue an inclusive path in order to achieve modernization. Peace, development, fairness, justice, democracy, and freedom are common values of humanity. Difference in system should not be used as an excuse to create division. Still less should democracy and human rights be used as tools or weapons to achieve political ends. We should stand against drawing ideological lines and expand common ground to promote world peace and development. Sixth, we must uphold equity and oppose bullying. Mutual respect and equity of countries big and small is a primary principle of the UN Charter. Major international issues should be handled by all countries, and international rules drawn up by all countries together. No country is above others, and no country should abuse its power to bully other sovereign countries. We should advocate and practice true multilateralism, promote equity of all countries in terms of rights, rules, and opportunities, and build a new type of international relations featuring mutual respect, equity, and justice, and win-win cooperation. Mr. President, colleagues, China, as a permanent member of the Security Council and the world's largest developing country, is committed to solidarity and cooperation with other countries. It will follow the trend of the times and pursue the shared interests of the vast majority of countries. China has been engaging in building global peace. We have actively promoted international peace and participated in international arms control, disarmament, and non-proliferation process. China is the top contributor of peacekeeping personnel among the P5, and it is the second largest founding contributor to both the UN and its peacekeeping operations. China is the only country in the world that pledges to keep to a path of peaceful development in its constitution. It is the only one among the 5 nuclear weapon states that is committed to no first use of nuclear weapons. It has thus made important contribution to global strategic stability. In response to the various security challenges, President Xi proposed the Global Security Initiative. He called on the international community to pursue common, comprehensive, cooperative, and sustainable security, to respect the sovereignty and territorial integrity of all countries, to abide by the purposes and principles of the UN Charter, to take the legitimate security concerns of all countries seriously, to peacefully resolve disputes through dialogue and consultation, and to maintain security in both traditional and non-traditional domains, thus contributing China's vision to reducing the peace deficit facing humanity and providing China's input to meeting global security challenges. China has been contributing to global development. We have worked to build a system of high-standard opening up and keep the global industrial and supply chains secure and stable. China is a major trading partner of over 130 countries and regions. Contributing about 30% of annual global growth, China is the biggest engine driving the global economy. China is a pace setter in implementing the 2030 agenda. It has met the poverty reduction goal 10 years ahead of schedule and accounts for over 70% of the gains in global poverty reduction. China is also an active participant in global governance and South-South cooperation. It has set up the China-UN Peace and Development Trust Fund and the Global Development and South-South Cooperation Fund. It has provided development aid to more than 160 countries in need and extended more debt service payments owed by developing countries than any other G20 member. At the 76th UNGA session, President Xi proposed the Global Development Initiative. Putting the people front and center, the GDI is a rallying call to refocus global attention on development and build a global community of development. At the recent high-level dialogue on global development, President Xi announced dozens of major concrete steps to implement the GDI, generating strong impetus for accelerating the implementation of the 2030 agenda. On the margins of this UNGA session, China hosted a ministerial meeting of the Group of Friends of the GDI, building more consensus on pursuing this initiative. As China forges ahead, its fast train of development will continue to drive global growth and deliver more benefits to people of all countries. China has been upholding the international order. We are committed to the purposes and principles of the UN Charter, the UN-centered international system, and the international order based on international law. China has been involved in multilateral affairs in all fields. It is a member of almost all universal intergovernmental organizations and a party to over 600 international conventions. It has concluded more than 27,000 bilateral treaties and fulfilled in good faith its international obligations. China abides by the Universal Declaration of Human Rights and has made relentless efforts to protect and strengthen its human rights. We stand firmly against attempts to politicize human rights and worked to promote healthy development of international human rights cooperation. As a member of the developing world, China will forever stand with other developing countries. We are heartened to see the rapid progress achieved by the developing world in recent years, and we will continue to speak up for other developing countries, help them overcome difficulties, and support efforts to raise the representation and say of developing countries in international affairs. Developing countries are no longer the silent majority in international and multilateral processes. With stronger solidarity, China and other developing countries have spoken out for justice and become a pillar of promoting development cooperation and safeguarding equity and justice. China has been providing public goods. In the face of COVID-19, China has fully advanced and engaged in global cooperation against the virus. We have done our best to provide anti-COVID supplies and shared our practices on COVID response. China is
Well, we're going to move away from Wang Yi's speech to the UN General Assembly, in which he talked about how China would address a time when he said global security faces uncertainty. He said, we must uphold peace and oppose war. He talked about the importance of win-win cooperation between countries and said that no country should abuse its power to bully other sovereign countries. And that is The World Today. Thank you for watching. We're on smart TV apps, Roku, Apple TV, Amazon Fire and Android TV, YouTube, Dailymotion, CGTN.com and the CGTN app. And in the UK, 24 hours a day on Freeview. There's more news at the top of the hour, but for now, from all of the team in London, goodbye.